Colin Tully.
Good morning, Linda, Nicola and Helen, and thank you all for coming here and presenting at the committee this morning. And I think your contributions have been extremely powerful, every one of them, representing your own children and other children with additional needs that need these services now. And I suppose there's a few things, well, there's many things I could ask. I could take up the whole meeting asking the questions I want to. But even maybe to talk about the regression during COVID. I know, Linda, you mentioned that the regression was unbelievable, and I don't know if you're comfortable elaborating on that. But I'm just wondering we hear so much about the impact COVID has had on children with additional needs and the mental health issues that has as well. I mean, what would have made a difference during that time when the schools, we were told, had to close? And I suppose what could be done now, or is there anything be done now to address that regression and as we move on? And I suppose then the other thing I'm concerned about, and if time allows I'll come back on a few other issues, but the thing is there's two options there for children: primary care and the Children's Disability Network teams, right? And the less complex, and I've been told this as well, are supposed to go to primary care, and the more complex. But you're saying then that some fall in between stools. So is that happening with many? And that's really concerning, because if a child's on a list, at least there's a hope that they may get some sort of therapies and interventions sometime and sooner rather than later. But if they're not on any list because they're falling between the two and can't be decided where they are, that's really concerning. So initially, if time allows, I said I'll come back in, but if that's okay.
In terms of regression during COVID, Finn has always had a lot of, my boy has always had a lot of complex care needs. And he needed his therapy and his intervention years ago. But during COVID, with the schools being out, he just completely got out of routine. Everything was topsy-turvy. It was so hard to keep him regulated, to keep him focused. As a family, we took him out for walks and did everything that he enjoyed. And this is the thing, like, you're hearing stories about how bad the HSE are and about how services are so awful. But if you came to live with us during the time of COVID, it was absolutely horrific. It was the worst time we've ever been through, including all his hospital admissions with his cystic fibrosis. Finn got into a routine of having fecal smearing episodes. So at night time, you'd go up to the room after you settle him to bed. The walls would be covered in faeces, the floor would be covered in faeces, and the child would be covered in faeces. This went on for 3 months, and between myself and my husband, we were both so strong together. But it really took its toll to see your child standing there covered in his own faeces. And I was ringing occupational therapists, begging for assessments, begging for an appointment for him, and we got nothing. We got a phone call to go through strategies that we'd already gone through. So, I mean, had he had intervention before that, maybe that would have not happened, because he'd be able to regulate himself and we'd be able to deal with that. But that's so hard for 3 months, having to go up and clean the bedroom every night, sometimes 2 to 3 times a night. Then we figured out kind of what was going on. It was all happening that his oldest brother was going to bed that little bit later, and he just wanted to act out. But because he was non-verbal, he couldn't tell us that. Had he got the intervention and the speech and language therapy at the time when he needed it, when he was 4 and 5, we wouldn't be in the position at that stage and where we are today. You know, like, the early intervention is so vital, and it is part of Section 25B in the UNCRPD, and it's just not happening. And had he gotten that, like, that's a regret I'll always have, and that's what keeps me up at night, other than what's going to happen to him when I die and when we're not around. It's the time that has passed. Like, he's only said Dad last week. So if he had got the early intervention, would he be saying Dad 4 years ago? What could be done now really about it is he came out of that period of COVID, and it took a lot of work, but had the services been there in time, they were just too late for him. And we went through an awful, hard 3 months as a family, even his brothers seeing that. And that's hard for a whole family to go through and to explain to other children. We have one child waiting 4 years in primary care, and our other boy is waiting for the CTNT, and he's just recently got services. But one of our committee members, her child just recently diagnosed with ASD, and she was put on the primary care list and on the CDNT list in the hope of what comes up quicker for her, because the services are so bad, which shouldn't happen. If you need one service, you're going down primary care. Multiple services is a CDNT. And the member of our committee was told, if you need to get a private assessment, do that, but ring us back so we can take you off the list. So that's what's happening in our county at the moment.
Yeah, I think Linda's just given a really good, very extreme example there of what happens if a child is not able to communicate. And we're not providing early intervention speech and language therapy. We know from research that even delaying by 3 months has a negative impact on outcomes. And yet we've kids on 2-3 year waiting lists. We've children who were born during COVID who didn't get the kind of the mother and toddler groups, the early kind of interaction because of COVID. And now we're coming out of that and there's no therapy in sight. So we have kids who are starting already at a disadvantage. But it's just storing up problems for the future. Like if you have a child who can't communicate any other way than through behaviour, then that's going to cause problems then in education, in social integration. It's just going to store up problems that are going to be more costly to solve in the long term, just by not putting in the early services when they're needed.
Particularly in our area, we were not reconfigured during that time, so it was even more of a stressful situation, because you would ring where we were dealing with previously and they were saying, listen, this is what's happening, it's coming down the line. A worrying trend was, what I had been told in particular to my son was, there are no therapists here because they were seconded out to testing centres and to help the response to the pandemic, which absolutely was an unprecedented time, I understand. Similar to Linda, we got a phone call to check in how we're getting on. We can post you out a social story. It's absolutely, it wasn't helpful at the time, as well as trying to be your child's teacher at home to do the homework, you're also expected to do OT, speech and language, all of that. And there was no end in sight, as you know, for the first lockdown. We didn't know how long it was going to go. And as the ladies have mentioned there doesn't appear to have been any forward thinking of when we are back up and running, where is this capacity to support these children that already have significant delays and I know have been regressing further socially, academically, in many, many other ways, but there was no forward planning for that. They continue to roll with the existing model that didn't counter for a pandemic and the situation. And I think it's trying to what we can do forward. There doesn't always appear to be that forward thinking, and that's where we're let down, and we seem to just go around in circles and putting out small fires all the time.
Okay.